Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, this is Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. And it's a cozy little corner of the internet for people who love narrative, like me. If you are watching this live, there is a live chat. A little crop of potatoes has grown up in it, and they are already discussing things. You are welcome to join there and discuss the stories as we go through them. I'll respond as I'm able. If you're not watching this live, though, the great benefit you have is you can jump ahead. And you can do that by looking down in the description below. There will be timestamps for each of the stories. You can jump ahead to whichever one interests you. All of them have something to do with the undead. However, they take different approaches. So we will see some variations on it. They are all Russian folklore. As it turns out, my Halloween month turned into Russian folklore month. I did have a plan last week, if I was able to run what Jurgen's been putting together for this month, which has been very interesting stuff. If you're not on his Patreon, you should be on his Patreon. That's Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. He's translating a bunch of untranslated German folklore to English, and he's doing a very good job of it. We read a lot of his stuff, but that's not who we're reading tonight. As we noticed, I wasn't here last week, but I did warn that I probably wouldn't be. As it turns out, I got sick, which isn't the end of the world. It's kind of to be expected when you travel for a wedding. And it went okay. It was a fine wedding. It was good to see a friend that I don't see that often. Anyhow, the topic of tonight, I've dubbed zombies, and I think that's the most appropriate one, but if you are new to folklore and the lore around this sort of stuff, allow me to regale you with a couple of caveats. In around, I'm going to say the 19th century, a split happened where a lot of literary folk wrote renditions of vampires, and those renditions were basically metaphorical takes on blood-sucking lords and selfish people and whatever else. I mean, the most famous being Bram Stoker's Dracula, but also we read, oh man, you know me in names. Can I pull it back? Chat will tell me, and I'll bring it up. It's the girl's name. Done much earlier than Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was also a rendition of a sort of noble that was a bloodsucker and so on. But understand that that's a very 19th to 20th century, actually kind of Irish thing, because Bram Stoker was Irish, and what's his name, who did what's it called? Me, my names, was also Irish. That wasn't really the way it was in folklore for a long time. In folklore around Europe for a long time, the difference between a vampire and a zombie was pretty negligible. You would get things that seemed more zombie-like, but then they would be sort of intelligent like a vampire. And then we looked last year, I think it was, or the year before, we looked at a bunch of renditions of German vampires, which are also sort of a fusion between zombies and what we would consider vampires. And we're going to see that carried over into the Russian folklore that we're going to read tonight, which is all to do with undead in some respect. However, they they all to do with sorry, brain just short-circuited. All to do with undead, but we will see stuff that feels a little more vampiric, and we'll see stuff that seems a little more zombie-ish. But I would say on the whole, what we're going to see is stuff that's probably more akin to the Brains style of zombie. All of our stories tonight are coming to us from Russian Fairytales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore, which is an older collection of Russian folklore that you can get for free on Project Gutenberg if you want to read the whole thing. Yeah. That is the gist of what we're doing tonight. I do have quite a few stories here that we could read. I don't know that I'm going to read them all. Some of them I consider optional. So we'll see how the time goes. And how my energy goes, and how my voice goes, and all of that sort of things. I see we have Lizzie Rose, Jumpstore, Genera, Tammy Morelli, Uncle Kitty, and GS, and maybe even more. My God. It is a busy day in the chat town. Congrats to Tammy on working towards her goal to lose weight. And I see that there's a bunch of conversation about a thumbtack, and I really can't read all the messages that give me the context. So I'll just hope that nothing too weird is happening there. Okay. Well, let's get to it. Because there's a lot to read. I didn't even really put together until this stream was running that this is my last stream before Halloween. Normally, by the way, if folks want to, normally for the last 2 years I've done kind of like a special presentation where I read a longer book, anywhere in the neighborhood of like 3 to 4 hours. Of a sort of classic piece of horror. And I wasn't able to do that this year. I was just too busy this month. There was no time for it. And truthfully, that was the right call. I can tell you now, being on the other side of this month, I don't know when that would have been set up or happened. I would have just let people down because I wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, I can't speak too well for the future. Who knows? But if I'm still here next year and nothing weird is going on, then I will return to that tradition next year. The gist of it is, though, if you are lonely or otherwise looking for something to do on Halloween or sometime this week, I have 2 readings. Both of them are rather long. One is the the Tale of the Vampire Girl that I cannot bring the name to my mind. Somebody in chat help me. What was the book I read? It's a short novella. It's about 4 hours long. And then last year I read The Parasite, which I think was Arthur Conan Doyle, if I recall, which was also a very interesting story. Those would occupy the better part of a day, frankly, if you watch them back to back. So if you need company on Halloween, go right ahead. Sheridan Le Fanu. Yes, Uncle Kitty. The one by Sheridan Le... Carmilla. Oh my God. I knew it started with a C. And I just couldn't get it in my head. It was like Cornelius. That'd be so funny. I'm going to make a loser vampire named Cornelius that everyone just sees through right away. Yes, Sheridan Le Fanu. Carmilla. Which is an excellent story. I really like. It's probably my favorite vampire story I've found. Thank you, Lizzie Rose, and thank you, Jumpstore, for reminding me, and Uncle Kitty for reminding me of the author. Sheridan Le Fanu is my favorite horror author. I guess weird fiction would be the term for his era, but which I discovered in the course of making these streams. Just half the reason, not the whole reason, half the reason I do these streams is to find stories for myself. Okay. Well, nobody cares about any of this, so I'm going to get to the story. Our first tale tonight is called The Coffin-Lid, and it's all about our subject of the undead in Russian folklore. And as such, it comes from the book Russian Fairytales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. For all the stories tonight, content warning, none of these are really made for kids. A muzik was driving along one night with a load of pots. This word muzik is going to come up a lot. It's a Russian word for peasant, poor person, if you will. His horse grew tired, and all of a sudden it came to a standstill alongside of a graveyard. The musique unharnessed his horse and set it free to graze. Meanwhile, he laid down himself on one of the graves. But somehow, he didn't go to sleep. He remained lying there for some time. Suddenly, the grave began to open beneath him. He felt the movement and sprang to his feet. The grave opened, and out of it came a corpse, wrapped in a white shroud and holding a coffin lid. It came out, and it ran to the church, laid the coffin lid at the door of that church, and then set off for the village. The musique was a daring fellow. He picked up the coffin lid and remained standing beside his cart, waiting to see what would happen. And after a short delay, the dead man came back. He was going to snatch up his coffin lid, but it was not to be seen. And then the corpse began to track it out, traced it up to the musique, and said, "Give me my lid. If you don't, I'll tear you to bits." "And my hatchet? How about that?" answered the musique. "Why, it's I who will be chopping you into small pieces." "No, give it back to me, good man," begs the corpse. "I'll give it when you tell me where you've been and what you done." "I've been in the village. There I've killed a couple of youngsters." "Well then, now tell me how they can be brought back to life." The corpse reluctantly made answer. "Cut off the left skirt of my shroud and take it with you. And when you come into the house where the youngsters were killed, pour some live coals into a pot and put the piece of the shroud in with them, and then lock the door. The lads will be revived by the smoke immediately." The musique cut off the left skirt of the shroud and gave up the coffin lid. The corpse went to its grave. The grave opened, but just as the dead man was descending into it, all of a sudden the cocks began to crow. And he hadn't time to get properly covered over. One end of the coffin lid remained sticking out of the ground. The musique saw all of this and made a note of it, and the day began to dawn. He harnessed his horse and drove it into the village. In one of the houses he heard cries and wailing, and in he went, and there lay 2 dead lads. "Don't cry, I can bring 'em back to life," says he. "To bring them to life, kinsman," say their relatives. "We'll give you half of all we possess." And so the musique did everything as the corpse had instructed him, and the lads came back to life, and their relatives were delighted. But they immediately seized the musique and bound him with cords, saying, "No, no, trickster! We'll hand you over to the authorities. Since you knew how to bring him back to life, maybe it was you who killed them." "What are you thinking about, true believers? Have the fear of God before your eyes," cried the musique. Then he told them everything that had happened to him during the night. Well, they spread the news through the village, and the whole population assembled and swarmed into the graveyard. And they found out the grave from which the dead man had come out. They tore it open, and they drove an aspen stake right into the heart of the corpse, so much that it might no more rise up and slay. But they rewarded the musique richly and sent him home with great honor. Oh, hello, Zombie Wolf. What a fun surprise. So we see something there that was a big factor in the German folklore. I'll just draw attention to it before we read on to another story. which is the idea that the dead rise in the night, and then they like resent the living and they'll target the living. Except in German folklore, it was often family. So you would have some family member die, and then they would arise out of the grave at night, and they would have to come around and kill all their family, or they would kill members of their family over several weeks after they died. And the solution was usually to dig them up. There was a couple of things about them facing down, so they'll dig downward instead of upwards. There's stakes in the hearts. There's cutting off the head. There's lots of stories about them still bleeding like a person who was alive. Lots of that kind of stuff. And so we see sort of echoes of it in here. We also see something that comes up a lot in this Russian folklore collection, which is just like characters doing either very little or doing downright nice things, like being treated poorly. It's not exclusive to Russian folklore, but it does come up here more than I see normally. Normally, when we read a lot of folklore collections, when someone does something, they just think the best of that person, and that's the whole story. But there's always these little catches in Russian folklore, and I'm not sure if it's just the collector's choices here, because I've not read another collection of Russian folklore, or whether this is just something with Russian folklore. A lot of paranoia. All right, a little bit of water. And then we'll go on to the two corpses. I see Uncle Kitty talking about becoming a cyborg. It's that little electrode probe, right? Down in the... I can't think of the name. I used to know the name of the nerve bundle that it focuses on for Parkinson's. Well, I certainly hope it works. My research many years ago was that it's a mixed bag, but it often can help. I don't know if you saw it on the other stream, but I mentioned that at one point in my degree, I was very fascinated with neurobiology, and I did a paper on what was called optogenetics, but basically infusing nerves with the light-sensitive stuff you find in algae that allows algae to draw away from the sun so it doesn't get killed. And they were viral vectoring that into neurons so that you could use fiber optics instead of electrodes for Parkinson's. Of course, the problem is for that to work, you have to infuse someone's neurons with pieces of algae DNA, which isn't impossible. But given that I did that paper, I don't know, 15 years ago or whatever, and it's still not a thing, I'm guessing there were some problems that were insurmountable. But it doesn't have the heat problem that the electrodes do. Anyways, this is not at all what people are here for. I'm getting distracted. Our next tale is called The Two Corpses. It also comes to us from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. A soldier had obtained leave to go home on furlough, to pray to the holy images, and to bow down before his parents. Some tradition I don't know. Couldn't really find anything on it, to be honest. And as he was going his way, at a time when the sun had long set and all was dark around, it chanced that he happened to pass by a graveyard. Just then he heard that someone was running after him and crying, "Stop! You can't escape!" And he looked back, and there was a corpse running and gnashing its teeth. The soldier sprang on one side with all his might to get away from it, and caught sight of a little chapel and bolted straight into it. There wasn't a soul in the chapel, but stretched out on a table there lay another corpse, with tapers burning in front of it. The soldier hid himself in a corner and remained there, hardly knowing whether he was alive or dead, but waiting to see what would happen. Presently up ran the first corpse, the one that had chased the soldier from the graveyard, and it dashed into the chapel. And thereupon the one that was lying on the table jumped up and cried to it, "What hast thou come here for?" "I've chased a soldier in here, so I'm going to eat him." "Come now, brother, he's run into my house. I shall eat him myself." "No, I shall." "No, I shall." And they set to work fighting. The dust flew like anything, and they'd have gone on fighting ever so much longer, only the cocks began to crow. And then both the corpses fell lifeless to the ground, and the soldier went on his wayward home in peace, saying, "Glory be to thee, O Lord, I am saved from the wizards." We're going to see like another sort of version of this that's a lot more spelled out, if you will. We do kind of get the heart. I like the comedy of this, by the way. I like the idea that he runs in and then two zombies just get in a fight with each other. Or if you want to even call these zombies. I mean, the undead that want to eat. They sort of, hack and slash at each other or whatever else. But we do get sort of the core of the Russian undead myth. Which is malice, that they will just run out of the dark and try to eat you, and there's no real greater thought given to their motivations, and that's going to kind of remain the case for a while. The next one is called The Dog and the Corpse. Well, I'll give the content warning after the introduction so everyone can hear it in case they skip. Whoa. Zombie Wolf says they got a bunch of books, including Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft complete works. I think I've read the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, I read some of it. It's one of the few things I listen to as a book on tape, which I don't normally like to do. Sounds weird for a guy who's basically making books on tape, but I just felt like it really worked with Lovecraft because it's almost... It's so overwritten. It has that very 1940s crackly AM radio feel to it when it was. So I did enjoy reading it that way. I've not read the full works of Edgar Allan Poe, but I have read a pretty substantial collection of it. A lot of it just washes out of my head, though. Nothing against the stories, just my bad memory. Our next tale is called The Dog and the Corpse. Comes to us from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. And content warning here because I know my audience. The dog does not live. I realize that's a spoiler. How it dies is not how you expect, but it does not live. So if that disturbs you, this story is probably only about 5 minutes long. Maybe do something else for 5 minutes. Muzik went out in pursuit of game one day and took a favorite dog with him. He walked and walked through the woods and bogs, but got nothing for his pains. At last the darkness of night surprised him. At an uncanny hour he passed by a graveyard, and there, at a place where two roads met, he saw standing a corpse in a white shroud. The Muzik was horrified and knew not which way to go, whether to keep on or turn back. Whatever happens, I'll go on, he thought, and on he went, his dog running at his heels, and when the corpse perceived him, it came to meet him, not touching the earth with its feet, but keeping about a foot above it, and a shroud fluttering after it. when it had come up with the sportsman, it made a rush on him, but the dog seized hold of it by its bare calves and began a tussle with it. And when the Musique saw his dog and the corpse grappling with each other, he was delighted that things had turned out so well for himself, and he set off running home with all his might. The dog kept up the struggle until cock-crow, when the corpse fell motionless to the ground, and then the dog ran off in pursuit of its master, and caught him up just as he reached home and rushed at him, furiously, trying to bite and to rend him. So savage was it, and so persistent, that it was as much as the people of the house could do to beat it off. "Whatever has come over the dog?" asked the Musique's old mother. "Why should it hate its master so?" And the Musique told her all that happened. "Oh, a bad piece of work, my son," said the old woman. "The dog was disgusted at your not helping it. There it was fighting with the corpse, and you deserted it, and thought only of saving yourself. And now it will owe you a grudge for ever so long." Next morning, while the family were going about the farmyard, the dog was perfectly quiet, but the moment its master made his appearance, it began to growl like anything. They fastened it to a chain, and for a whole year they kept it chained up. But in spite of that, it never forgot how its master had offended it, and one day it got loose and flew straight at him and began trying to throttle him, and so they had to kill it. Yeah, Jump Store. It's one of those turns of phrases that never meant that, but then became more associated with that as a form of slang. Yeah, everyone's mad that he abandoned his dog. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, too, because normally the stories just don't call this out. The fact that the dog, normally these folklore stories treat animals as just like tools or utility items. But in this case, it calls it out. It's like the dog is a sympathetic character. But as is kind of the case with the Russian folklore stories, it doesn't really matter if you do something nice. Apparently, you'll still have horrible things happen to you. All right. I don't know if anyone's still listening, but if you were worried about the dog story and you went away, that story is done. All right. Our next tale is called The Shroud, as in a burial shroud. And it comes to us from Russian Fairytales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. In a certain village, there was a girl who was lazy and slothful, hated working, but would gossip and chatter away like anything. Well, she took it into her head to invite the other girls to a spinning party. Pause. Most of you in the chat already know this, but in case anybody's watching this in news, what is a spinning party? Spinning parties are arguably the most important thing for folklore, because in many cultures it's where these stories were told. And what they were was a bunch of women would get together, almost exclusively women, and they would take whatever material was of the land, usually something like flax, but it could be cotton, it could be wool, it could be something else. Wool or flax are the two that we deal with in our regions that I read from. And they spin it on a wheel, and it takes a long time to make thread out of it is what they're doing, and wrap it around a thing called a distaff, which is a big spike. So when she's inviting the girls to a spinning party, she's inviting them to come and do one of the core labors that was expected of a woman at this time, which is spinning thread out of fibers. For in the villages, as everyone knows, it is the lazy bones who gives the spinning feast, and the sweet-toothed are those who go to it. In other words, so the last little commentary, and we'll carry on with the story. What they're saying is she is paying for a meal so that other people will come and do the spinning for her. Lizzie Rose says, spinning party? I think you mean girls' night. I mean, that's true enough, but a lot of spinning parties were also attended by men who, by all accounts, were just drunk and useless. Oh, we have a new folk in chat. Thetis. Let me know if I'm saying that name wrong. Thank you for joining the chat, and welcome. Okay, back to the story. Well, on the appointed night, she got her spinners together. They span for her, and she fed them and feasted them. Among other things they chatted about was this. Which of them all was the boldest? Says the lazy bones. I'm not afraid of anything. Well then, says the spinners, if you're not afraid, go past the graveyard to the church and take down the holy picture from the door and bring it here. Good. I'll bring it. Only each of you must spin me a distaffel. In other words, you need to make me a bunch of thread. This was just her sort of notion. To do nothing herself, but to get others to do it for her. Oh, so she's a king? Well, she went, took down the picture, and brought it home after her. Her friends all saw that sure enough it was the picture from the church. But the picture had to be taken back again, and it was now the midnight hour. Who was to take it? At length Lazybones said, You girls go on spinning, and I'll take it back myself. I'm not afraid of anything. So she went and put the picture back in its place. As she was passing the graveyard on her return, she saw a corpse in a white shroud, seated on a tomb. It was a moonlight night. Everything was visible. She went up to the corpse and drew away its shroud from it, and the corpse held its peace, not uttering a word. No doubt the time for it to speak had not come yet. Well, she took the shroud and went home. There, she said, I've taken back the picture and put it in its place. And what's more, here's a shroud I took away from a corpse. Well, some of the girls were horrified. Others didn't believe what she said and laughed at her. But after they had supped and laid down to sleep, all of a sudden, the corpse tapped on the window and said, Give me my shroud. Give me my shroud. The girls were so frightened they didn't know whether they were alive or dead. But the Lazybones took the shroud and went to the window, opened it, and said, There, take it. No, replied the corpse. Restore it to the place you took it from. And just then the cock suddenly began to crow, and the corpse disappeared. The next night, when the spinners had all gone home to their own houses, at the very same hour as before, the corpse came, tapped at the window, and cried, Give me my shroud. Well, the girl's father and mother opened the window and offered him his shroud. No, says he. Let her take it back to the place she took it from. Really now, how could one go to a graveyard with a corpse? What a horrible idea, she replied, and just then the cocks crew, and the corpse disappeared. The next day, the girl's father and mother sent for the priest, told him the whole story, and entreated him to help him in their trouble. Couldn't a service be performed, they said, and the priest reflected a while, and then he replied, "Please tell her to come to the church tomorrow." The next day, the lazy bones went to church. The service began, the numbers of people came to it, but just as they were going to sing the cherubim song, there suddenly arose, goodness knows whence, so terrible a whirlwind that all the congregation fell flat on their faces, and it caught up that girl, and then flung her down on the ground, and the girl disappeared from sight, and nothing was left of her but her back hair. Not really sure what the back hair line is about. I feel like that's a thing that comes up in other parts of the book, so it might be an idiom for the region. She was afraid of nothing, so she wasn't really very motivated to do a very simple task, which is just to go down to the graveyard and put it back. And nobody else could do it for her, and so her refusal to do it ultimately wound up in her death. Uncle Kitty said that must have been a lot of back hair. Well, some people have a lot of back hair. People are hung up on the back hair thing. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. It's a strange thing to say. Our next two tales relate... It looks like we are going to get through all our stories. Our next two tales relate to the undead, but in a very different way. I don't want to give too much away. They are basically two versions of the same premise. But there's something that's going to happen in these tales with the dead that usually happens with the Fae in other regional stories that I've read. It's a pretty standard formulation, but I've not ever seen it accredited to the dead before, as it's something the dead do. I don't think. We've seen it associated with the Venetians. We've seen it in Germany, where I talked about the fact that there was like a magical version of Venice and Venetians in German folklore that's based on just imagination, basically. But also we see a lot of this in Japanese and Irish folklore and stuff. You'll know what it is when we reach it if you're familiar with it, but it's interesting to me because I've never seen it associated with the dead. Anyways, both these stories sort of revolve around the same premise. Janera says either she was a hairy back or it's from the back of her head. Yeah, I kind of think it might be the back of the head. That was sort of my first impression, but it's also possible they're just trying to say that she was ugly or something, right? Like, the folklore often takes little stabs like that. Our next tale is called The Ride on the Gravestone, and it comes to us from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. Late one evening, a certain artisan happened to be returning home from a jovial feast in a distant village. There met him on the way an old friend, one who'd been dead for some 10 years. "Good health to you," said the dead man. "I wish you good health," replied the reveller. Straightway forgot that his acquaintance had ever so long ago bidden the world farewell. "Let's go to my house. We'll quaff a cup or two once more." "Come along, on such a happy occasion as this meeting of ours. We may as well have a drink." And they arrived at a dwelling, and there they drank and revelled. "Now then, goodbye. It is time for me to go home," said the artisan. "Stay a bit. Where do you want to go now? Spend the night here with me?" "No, brother, don't ask me. It cannot be. I've got business to do tomorrow. I must get home as early as possible." "Well, goodbye. But why should you walk? Better get on my horse. It will carry you home quickly." "Thanks. Let's have it." He got on its back and was carried off, and just as a whirlwind flies, all of a sudden a cock crew, It was awful. All around were graves, and the rider found he had a gravestone under him. So in this one we see somebody who you perceive to be friendly sort of tricks you into being trapped into their realm with them. In this one, it's a little more abstract, and it might be implied that he died. It's a bit of an unusual ending. Leslie Rose says the dead are going to give humans gold. No, not the good stuff. But we see a lot more specific reference to this kind of idea in the next story, which I will roll right into, because the next story is straight out of like Tir na Nog or something, which is an Irish legend. Our next tale is called The Two Friends. It's a very similar story to the last one, but it has some key differences. It also comes to us from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. In the days of old, there lived in a certain village 2 young men. They were great friends, went to Besyaras together, in fact regarded each other as brothers, and they made this mutual agreement. Whichever of the 2 should marry first was to invite his comrade to his wedding, and it was not to make any difference whether he was alive or dead. Well, about a year after this, one of the young men fell ill and died. A few months later, his comrade took it into his head to get married. So he collected all his kinsmen and set off to fetch his bride. Now it happened that they drove past the graveyard, and the bridegroom recalled his friend to mind. He remembered his old agreement, and so he had the horses stop, saying, "I'm going to my comrade's grave. I shall ask him to come and enjoy himself at my wedding. A right trusty friend was he to me." And so he went to the grave and began to call aloud, "Comrade dear, I invite thee to my wedding." And suddenly the grave yawned, and the dead man rose and said, "Thanks be to thee, brother, that thou hast fulfilled thy promise. And now that we may profit by this happy chance, into my abode, let us quaff a glass apiece of grateful drink." "I'd have gone, only the marriage procession is stopping outside. All the folks are waiting for me." "Nay, brother," replied the dead man, "surely it won't take long to toss off a glass." Well, the bridegroom jumped into the grave, and the dead man poured him out a cup of liquor, and he drank it off. And 100 years passed away. "Quaff another cup, dear friend," said the dead man, and he drank a second cup, and 200 years passed away. "Now, comrade dear, quaff a third cup," and the dead man said, "and then go in God's name and celebrate thy marriage." And he drank the third cup, and 300 years passed away. And the dead man took leave of his comrade. The coffin lid fell, the grave closed. The bridegroom looked around where the graveyard had been, was now a piece of a waste ground. No road was to be seen, no kinsmen, no horses. All around grew nettles and tall grass. He ran to the village, but the village was not what it used to be. The houses were different. The people were all strangers to him. He went to the priest, but the priest was not the one who used to be there. He told him about everything that had happened. The priest searched through the church books and found that 300 years before this occurrence had taken place, a bridegroom had gone to the graveyard on his wedding day and had disappeared. And his bride, after some time, had passed by and married another man. So in that one, we see the really classic formulation of you think you've been there for 3 days or 3 somethings, whatever it is. But in fact, you've been there for 3 centuries. We see that in a piece of Japanese folklore that I know about the sea dragon, I think it is, kingdom under the sea. But more famously, we see it in the Irish folklore of Tirnanog, which is almost entirely that formulation. You go down to the bottom of a lake or a moor or something like that, and there lies Tirnanog, a big grand temple, and usually some princess who wants you to stay and whatever else. And then one reason or another you leave and you discover that it's been 3 centuries and not 3 days. However, the other thing that really stands out here that's very Fae-ish is that they pay this price of time or life or, not being able to leave their realm, which is death in this case, because they share a drink with them or they drink what's offered of them. And it's interesting to me because this is the kind of stuff I would expect from Fae in most folklore, but here it is with the dead. And not only that, your friends, the dead. And the only message I can take away is it seems to be that the dead, being dead changes who you are, and you shouldn't trust a person who you knew in life because they are no longer alive and that their nature is different. Genera says, I just realized that Rory would be a great D&D narrator. Well, thank you. Uncle Kitty says, isn't he a DM? Yes, I have 3 tables I DM. 2 are 5e and 1 is Shadow Dark. Must have been mentioned during my absence. Not that I'm surprised with the solo RPGs we used to do. Yes, indeed. I wish I could think of a way to make the solo RPGs work for me again. I know I'm not going to get anyone's hopes up, but I will say it's not a thing I've just completely forgotten about. I think about it about once a week, like how I could make that work for me again. Lizzie Rose says, Irishima Taro was the name of that Japanese tale, and the guy marries a sea princess, wants to visit his parents, returns to find 300 years have passed. Yes. And the lady who put that collection together lived in Ireland for a lot of years. And I remember there was some controversy as to whether that was actually Japanese folklore or whether she had sort of imported some Irish folklore into Japanese folklore. I don't know enough about it to make any judgment call on that. I just remember that was a thing with that collection. But yeah, it's strikingly similar anyways to the Tirnanog myth. Or at least some renditions of it. Yeah, what can I say? I like telling stories. I like writing and telling stories. That's kind of my whole personality at this point, I guess. Okay. The Soldier and the Vampire is our last story here, so. They call this one a vampire. It's a strange one. Oh yeah, did I show you this? My funny band-aids. My cat bit me quite hard. He wasn't trying to be mean. There was another cat outside and it got him all riled up, and I tried to pick him up and he made me pay for it. But I found it funny because we had our band-aids. We get fun band-aids. But I just randomly grabbed one, and one is Marvel and one is Hello Kitty, which I think is a good summary of my personality. All right. Our last tale of the night is called The Soldier and the Vampire, though whether you would call this a vampire in modern times, I'll leave to you. Your judgment. It comes to us from Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. Whoops. Oh, bye, zombie. Hope the pies are good. A certain soldier was allowed to go home on furlough. Well, he walked, and after a time he began to draw nearer to his native village. Not far off from that village lived a miller in his mill. In old times, the soldier had been very intimate with him. Why shouldn't he go and see his friend? He went. The Miller's side received him cordially and at once brought out liquor, and the two began drinking and chattering about their ways and doings. All this took place towards nightfall, and the soldier stopped so long at the Miller's that it grew quite dark. When he proposed to start for his village, his host exclaimed, "Spend the night here, trooper. It's very late now. Perhaps you might run into mischief." "How so?" "God is punishing us. A terrible warlock has died among us, and by night he rises from the grave, wanders through the village, and does such things as bring fear upon the very boldest. How could you even you help being afraid of him?" "Not a bit of it. A soldier is a man who belongs to the crown, and crown property cannot be drowned in water nor burnt in fire. I'll be off. I'm tremendously anxious to see my people as soon as possible." And off he set. His road lay in front of a graveyard. On one of the graves he saw a great fire blazing. "What's that?" thought he. "Let's have a look." And when he drew near, he saw that the warlock was sitting by the fire, sewing boots. "Hail, brother," calls out the soldier. And the warlock looked up and said, "What have you come here for?" "Why, I wanted to see what you're doing." The warlock threw his work aside and invited the soldier to a wedding in town. "Come along, brother. Let's enjoy ourselves. There is a wedding going on in the village." "Come along," says the soldier. And they came to where the wedding was. There they were given drink and treated with the utmost hospitality, and the warlock drank and reveled and then grew angry. He chased all the guests and relatives out of the house and threw the wedded pair into a slumber, and then he took 2 files and an awl and pierced the hands of the bride and the bridegroom with the awl and began drawing off their blood. Having done this, he said to the soldier, "Now let's be off." Well, they went off. On the way, the soldier said, "Tell me, why did you draw off their blood in those files?" "Why, in order that the bride and the bridegroom might die. Tomorrow morning no one will be able to wake them. I alone know how to bring them back to life." "How's that managed?" "More, the bride and bridegroom must have cuts made in their heels, and some of their own blood must then be poured back into those wounds. I've got the bridegroom's blood stowed away in my right hand pocket, and the bride's in my left." The soldier listening to this without letting a single word escape him. Then the warlock began boasting again, "Whatever I wish, that I can do." "I suppose it's quite impossible to get the better of you," says the soldier. "Why impossible? If anyone were to make a fire out of aspen boughs, 100 loads of them, and they were to burn me on that fire, then he'd be able to get the better of me. Only he'd have to look out sharp in burning me, for snakes and worms and different kinds of reptiles would creep out of my insides, and crows and magpies and jackdaws would come flying up. All these must be caught and flung on the fire. If so much as a single maggot were to escape, then there'd be no help for it. In that maggot I should slip away." Well, the soldier listened to all of this and did not forget it. He and the warlock talked, and at last They arrived at the grave.
"Well, brother," said the warlock, "now I'll tear you to pieces. Otherwise you'd be telling all this."
What are you talking about? Don't you deceive yourself. I serve God and the Emperor.
And the warlock gnashed his teeth and howled aloud and sprang at the soldier, who drew his sword and began laying about him with sweeping blows. And they struggled and struggled, and the soldier was all but at the end of his strength. "Ah," thinks he, "I'm a lost man, and all for nothing." And suddenly the cocks began to crow, and the warlock fell lifeless to the ground.
The soldier took the phials of blood out of the warlock's pockets and went on to the house of his own people. And when he got there and had exchanged greetings with his relatives, they said, "Do you see any disturbance, soldier?" "No, saw none." "There now! Why, we've got a terrible piece of work going on in the village. A warlock has taken to haunting it." And after talking a while, they lay down to sleep. And the next morning the soldier awoke and began asking, "I'm told you've got a wedding going on somewhere here." "Oh, there was a wedding in the house of a rich muzik," replied his relatives. "But the bride and the bridegroom have died this very night. What from, nobody knows." "Where does this muzik live?" They showed him the house. Thither he went without speaking a word, and when he got there he found the whole family in tears. "What are you mourning about?" says he. "Such and such is the state of things, soldier," said they. "I can bring your young people to life again. What will you give me if I do?" "Take what you like, even were it half of what we've got." And the soldier did as the warlock had instructed him, and brought the young people back to life. And instead of weeping, there began to be happiness and rejoicing. The soldier was hospitably treated and well rewarded. Then, left about face, off he marched to the starosta, and told him to call the peasants together and to get ready 100 loads of aspen wood. Well, they took the wood into the graveyard, dragged the warlock out of his grave, and placed him on the pyre, and set it alight, and the people all standing round in a circle with brooms and shovels and fire irons, and the pyre became wrapped in flames. The warlock began to burn. His corpse burst, and out of it crept snakes and worms and all sorts of reptiles, and up came flying crows and magpies and jackdaws, as he had promised. The peasants knocked them down, though, and flung them back into the fire, not allowing so much as a single maggot to creep away. And so the warlock was thoroughly consumed, and the soldier collected his ashes and strewed them to the winds. From that time forth, there was peace in the village. The soldier received the thanks of the whole community, and he stayed at home some time, enjoying himself thoroughly. Then he went back to the Tsar's service with money in his pocket, and when he'd served his time, he retired from the army and began to live at his ease. Uncle Kitty says, "I've seen folklore similar to this, but it was vampires that did it, not warlocks." Well, the story does call him a vampire in the title, and then later refers to him as a warlock. I mean, it's just one of those things where, like, it's inconsistencies all the way down with folklore. Cinnamon pie? Oh, yummy. We're talking about pumpkin pie. As a kid, I really didn't like pumpkin pie. It's grown on me a bit. I think at least part of the problem was I wasn't having very good pumpkin pie. But I tend to go for, more like jammy, fruity pies. Jumpstore of Faust Cakes has a recipe I mentioned. It also references the Psych episode I mentioned. Sorry, I had to find a way the chat would allow me to give the website. Oh, wonder if I can find it, because I can put things in there. Tammy enjoyed my voices and wishes everyone a wonderful Halloween. Well, thank you, Tammy. Thank you for listening. I know that Zombie Wolf had random trivia. Zombie Wolf's random trivia was Night of the Living Dead was not the first zombie movie. The earliest known zombie film was a 1932 film called The White Zombie. It was based on the book titled Magic Island. I bet that's where the musician got the name. Well, there is a collection of the dead. Or the undead. It's not all the stories in this section, though I'll be honest, I don't really... This section is technically titled Ghost Stories. None of these seem like ghost stories to me, first of all. But even if I ignore that, the first two tales in this section, well, they are good, and I will eventually read them somewhere, at some point. Not somewhere, here. They, to my ear, have absolutely nothing to do with ghosts or the dead or anything. Ooh, jack-o'-lantern pumpkin hand pies. Well, now that sounds good. I've always wanted to make a pumpkin pie with like pumpkin, like a sweet pumpkin, but it's actually quite hard in my region to find those pumpkins. Like, you'll find a lot of pumpkins, but they're pumpkins not made for cooking. Like, you can cook with them, but they're going to be very bland. They're pumpkins made for carving, and finding a pumpkin to cook with is hard. And then, you got to process it all. But I would like to, at some point, try that. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Zombie Wolf mentioned a buttermilk pie, and I'll be honest, as a person who's done a lot of, like, southern cooking and stuff like that, I've never heard of a buttermilk pie, so it sounds like a southern thing. So I'm going to look into that, because I love buttermilk. Janera says, Happy Halloween, everyone. Don't get sick on candy. Indeed. Well, as I mentioned before, if you folks are missing my longer read-throughs that I do around Halloween, or on Halloween, there's the Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, which is a good 4 hours, I think, about. And there's The Parasite by Arthur Conan Doyle, I believe, which is like a 2.5 or 3 hours or something like that. So between the two of those, you can have me keep you company on Halloween if you so desire. Janera says, it's almost a custard, and it's like 50% sugar. Well, you have my attention. Uncle Kitty says, most canned pumpkin is butternut squash. Now that I didn't know. Gonna look into that. That makes sense to me, though, because butternut squash overall is just a sweeter, more prevalent gourd. Jump Store doesn't work Fridays, so they're having a big movie marathon. Well, you have fun. This is some deep pull stuff for the D&D nerds, but if you watch this, the following text will mean something to you. I am running the Sly Flourish one-shot of Ravenloft I6 with Shadow Dark as the base system, because it is very similar to AD&D. We're doing the classic start at the gates. Well, not the classic, but if you're not familiar with it, it's not my own invention. Start at the gates of Ravenloft. Shroud says, hey, this time we'll have dinner. And then they have up until that, usually about 3 or 4 hours, to make it as far into the dungeon as they can, the Castle Ravenloft. And then they'll see if they can fight and live through a fight with Shroud. And if none of that means anything to you, that's fine. It's some deep pull nerd stuff. But I'm doing that tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to it. I would have done it on Halloween, but not enough people were available. Okie doke. Well, you folks, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you folks have a good Halloween. I will be back in November for my favorite season. As we all know, as much as I do love Halloween, I love Christmas. Although we probably won't go straight into Christmas stories because it's just not enough to fill 2 months every year. Anyways. On Jumpstore says, besides my neighbors think that because I'm Jewish, I don't celebrate Halloween, so they don't knock on my door. That's not an assumption I've ever made. Like, obviously you make that assumption about Christian holidays, but I've never thought, oh, they're Jewish, they don't like Halloween, because I've not even really seen that to be the case. Oh, anyways. Thank you everybody for watching. Have a happy Halloween, and have a good sleep. I'll keep the fire warm.